So it's I get to introduce Alex Donovan, and I'm excited about that. Oh, good. Spotlight me, Gabe, so I can see my big old face. Oh, good. There's Alex. I met Alex. I don't even know. Do you remember what your first year was taking CPE at Good Sam?
Pre-pandemic and the rest is a blur.
Yeah, that's fair. So Alex came into CPE when I was brand new training as a supervisor. And I feel like I kind of grew up with her as a supervisor and she is a chaplain. We learned a lot together. And Alex took 4 units of CPE, 2 at Good Samaritan Hospital and 2 out in Denver somewhere. Center for Spirituality, right?
Center for Spiritual Living.
Yeah. And Alex is this rare bird in the Episcopal Church. She's an endorsed lay minister, which I had meetings with the Commission on Ministry last year, and they were like, what? They had no idea there was this process to endorse lay ministers. So maybe Alex will share a little bit about that. But Alex is also a poet, a published poet, which what I found compelling about Alex's work in CPE is how she sort of seamlessly integrated her life as a poet and her work in chaplaincy, which was always like so beautiful and so compelling. You even made do you remember a poetry oracle where we could pull little bits of poetry out just to meditate on? It was great. But she works now for Optum as a corporate chaplain, so providing spiritual care to employees and doctors and care providers, which is a bit different than providing care to patients, which is more typical. She was also a prison volunteer, so she volunteered for over a year in the jails with prison ministry, which is how she came into CPE. And she's a new mother too, which I think is significant. So is there anything else, Alex, that I'm missing?
No, I'll probably fill in some pieces with my
Well, but
story as it is, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm delighted you're here. Thank you for coming and spending your time here tonight. So I'll let you go ahead, and remember, your questions can go right in the chat. Go
Thank
ahead,
you.
Alex. It's all yours.
Thanks so much, Janet. It's a treat to be here, treat to get to see some familiar faces, and always an honor to be asked to share this journey because it's really it's my favorite journey that I've been on, really, my chaplaincy journey. I feel like so much for me started that first day I walked in to the first day of CPE at the hospital with Jana, and didn't realize that how much we'd be connected for life and how central she and the chaplaincy journey would be for me in my formation, not just as a chaplain, but as a human being. So like Jana shared, so while I was chatting with Jana and Gabe and Sharon at the beginning before you all joined, that it was actually me wanting to volunteer with the prison ministry and the Los Angeles County jails that was kind of my back door into the world of chaplaincy. My boss at the time was an Episcopal priest and told me, you should really call Ron David, and he does this training program for chaplains, and that's the way that you can volunteer in the jails. And I had no idea what the training program was, no inkling that I was interested in chaplaincy, no idea what CPE was, but knew that this was a way that I could train to volunteer in a way that was calling to me, and fell in love in the process of the training. Of course, was with Jana and Ron David at Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles. Fell in love with the context of healthcare chaplaincy, with the work in the hospital, and then even more so with the process of clinical pastoral education, the self-reflective work of it, the formation of it. And I got hooked. So I decided to do a second unit again at Good Samaritan Hospital. So much probably that I could share about that time in the hospital with my cohorts there, and then kept going. So we moved after my second unit. My husband and I moved to Colorado to pursue his work, and I continued CPE at a Centers for Spiritual Living, which is a science of mind community of faith. I did 1 unit virtual with them and 1 unit in person. It's in Golden, Colorado. And at the same time, I was offered a job in hospice. So I was, oh, and I forgot, Janet, that there was that little blip in between where I also got to do part of my unit as a poet in residence at a sober living community in Southern Colorado. And Janet helped me creatively work through that as a chaplaincy context, as I was also I was poet chaplain in that space. All they knew I was their poetry teacher, um, but to me it was also a chaplaincy context. So that just happened to also be in Colorado right before we moved out here. Let's see, just before the pandemic, I also took a job at my local hospital as an on-call chaplain. So I was working 8 to 5 day job as a hospice chaplain and several nights a week from 5 to 8 as an on-call hospital chaplain. Crazy schedule. I would not do it now, not with kids, but I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to do it and glad that I did it in that season of life. It was good training for being a new mom later, actually. Now when I have to get up in the middle of the night, at least I don't need makeup. But that was also really fortuitous because that was right when the pandemic hit. And I really think that the moral distress and moral injury of those who did not have a meaningful way to show up and serve others was probably greater. It was in many ways easier for those of us who had a way to show up in a context where you could do something. Not you couldn't fix the thing, but you could do something. And so I was grateful to have something to throw myself into, both at the hospital and in the hospice company that I worked with. A lot of that was being a bridge between patients and their families, but for me, just as much of that work was about showing up to our staff. And I still think about something that one of our colleagues at the hospital there with Jana and Ron taught me, which was to think about any healthcare system like we would a congregation, whether that's a church or a synagogue, any house of worship, and to think about the staff of that system as your congregants and patients as just the guests. Not just, but they're the guests. They're the ones that come and go. And if we take good care of our congregation, they will take better care of their guests. And that's a model that I've clung to, that I still use in my work. And it's something that really became heightened for me when the pandemic hit. So I really started to value holidays. I loved being on call at the hospital on holidays because I would bring chocolate and Valentine's, so poetry. I would bring poems for the staff on Valentine's Day, bunny ears for nurses on Easter, chocolate. So we would hand out things to patients, but really we were there to hand out support and goodies to the staff. And I remember taking some sweet photos of nurses who would draw bunny ears or bunny noses on their masks and took photos and had forbidden hugs in the hallway. But just being in the trenches with them was really, really meaningful for me. And a lot of I found that my energy was really shifting to how do I support my fellow staff. On the hospice side, a lot of what I was doing was researching out of desperation for myself and for my team what moral injury was, what moral distress was, secondary trauma, burnout, all of the things that have become a little bit more maybe even buzzwords or more popular to talk about now, but weren't front of mind at that point. And so a lot of my focus shifted to that. And I ended up volunteering, kind of being voluntold by my hospice company to offer some of this service to our partners at Optum Health, these are mostly nurse practitioners, physician assistants who are in the nursing home setting that we, with my hospice company, collaborated with. They would refer to us, we would team up with them. And they were just so grateful for the support. It was like water in the desert. And I told myself at the time, if I ever got a chance to work for them, for their team, that I would. And long story short, I was offered a role in April 2021 that's fully staff support in a healthcare setting, but in a corporate world. So I'm a corporate healthcare staff support chaplain. Let's see. So that's a little bit of where I am. I can share more about what I actually do day to day in that space. But to back up a little bit, like Jana shared, I'm not ordained. I'm a lay endorsed chaplain endorsed by the Episcopal Church. I also do not hold an MDiv. I did not go to seminary. My undergraduate degree is in religious studies, and with a minor in linguistics. I thought I was going to study languages around the world. Still a language nerd, still love it. But my master's degree is in creative writing and poetry. And that program I enrolled in out of probably grief and desperation more than any career aspiration. It was how I survived the grief of losing my mom to breast cancer in 2012. And it's still very much how I navigate the world. Poetry is how I navigate the world of the world in general and the world of spiritual care. So it's my best integration tool. It's the way, it's the place I take hard encounters, instances of trauma, things that I have a hard time metabolizing without some kind of tool. It's also a universal language that I use to care for others across faith settings. And someday I'd like to write a book on the role of metaphor in spiritual care. So if we have time and you are curious about metaphor, I've got some good ones from some good stories, so we can dive into that if we've got time. But metaphor, I think, is my through line. It's how I care for others. It's how I care for myself. And I think in all of that, my greatest classroom now, looking back on it, probably was my mom's experience with hospice. It's no mistake, I don't think, that I ended up as a hospice chaplain. And even though I don't work in hospice now, hospice chaplaincy still feels very central to who I am and how I show up. So her experience at the end of her life it's still my greatest classroom. It's my deepest experience of what I would call hell, just sheer pain, the worst thing you can imagine. It's also my greatest experience of what I would call heaven, just that experience of eternity breaking in and experiencing a sanctity that I have never experienced anywhere else. So it's that intersection of those things that I kind of hold with me to some degree all the time, and it's almost like that's the place I'm trying to return through my chaplaincy. That's the room I go back to. So, and my mom had 3 different chaplains that she interacted with on her journey. She had one, Jana, you know, Michael Elson, at gosh, I'm trying to remember the name of the hospital that he's at, the Sims Mann Center at UCLA. It's UCLA, right?
Yeah. He's in the infusion center now.
Okay, yeah. So my mom developed a friendship with him, and he and I actually have stayed in touch. He was just a dear ally and companion to her, and someone who also helped her integrate different parts of her own spiritual path through her cancer journey. She had another chaplain who was a friend of hers named Beverly, who was her hospice chaplain and taught me how to just be a daughter at the bedside of her dying mother, and who invited me into that sacred holy space and taught me to breathe. All we did was breathe together. She taught me to kind of help regulate my mom's breathing, but just to breathe with her. And I think it was her that helped shift that space from hell to heaven, to allow it to be holy for me, and to give me a way to be present. And I still think about her. We're still in touch as well. I think about that breathing a lot, but it's also shaped the way I think about what we do as chaplains in those crossroads moments. We're memory shapers. We actively change the feel and the fabric of someone's memory of an experience like that, partly by being a place of stillness and helping someone slow down and breathe, or bringing a warm blanket or a cup of water. So I still think about her a lot. We also had a terrible chaplain. We had a chaplain that was there with the company before Beverly came into the picture, who was very much there out of his own insecurity and need. My mom is a spiritual director, and so I just remember watching my poor mom in her final days realize the great need of this gentleman, and kind of sitting up in her bed and saying, tell me more, tell me more about how you're feeling, and taking care of him. And it was so funny. My dad and I were not impressed. Ended up going with a different hospice company, and partly so we could get a better chaplain. But I think about that because I also like to remember we're not all that powerful. He did not do great harm. He was not he didn't take care of my mom in that moment, but he let her be a spiritual director. Maybe that was in some way a gift. And so I kind of hold those two things together. Like, we can do so much good, and we're not all that powerful to destroy someone's world necessarily. Um, let's see. Fast forward. I'm jumping around a bit, but please feel free to ask me questions. Yeah, go ahead, Jenna.
Well, a question came up for me, and it came up in the chat from David Kitch, is about your use of metaphor. So the question that came to mind immediately was, well, what is your operating question? I mean, your operating metaphor for your work as a chaplain?
It is that the house of worship. It is that if I take care of my congregation, they will take care of their guests. I also relied heavily, especially during my CPE journey, I still do with my staff that I journey with today, is the metaphor of Christ's descent into hell. That was the central metaphor that I used in my certification paperwork for becoming board certified. The idea of, how quickly we want to jump to resurrection, and how actually that descent into hell is just as important, actually probably more, when it comes to spiritual care for others. So being willing to journey with someone into their hell, whatever that is, and allowing them to also point us to their heaven, but not being the ones to try to nudge them to that place prematurely. So the descent into hell, I think, is one of my favorite metaphors for chaplaincy. And then I would just say that every spiritual care encounter, I'm looking for a central metaphor. I remember one of the things I love about hospital chaplaincy is the mystery of what's behind that door. That's also what makes it terrifying. You have no idea what you're about to walk into. And you often don't even have time to read the chart. Hopefully you do, but I remember walking into a room, and on call at the hospital, especially during the pandemic, usually I was only going into deaths that had already happened. That's why I was called. I remember walking into a room and just saying, hi, I'm the chaplain. Here are a few things I can offer. I can help walk you through next steps. I can get you some water. I can get a warm blanket. I'm happy to offer a bedside prayer or a blessing. And they said, please, a bedside blessing would be great. I said, wonderful. Tell me about your dad. Did he practice any particular faith tradition? And they looked at each other, and then they looked at me and they said, motorcycles. I was like, brilliant. So we said a prayer to send him off to the horizon to meet his buddies who were waiting for him on the other side. Yeah. So I've got more like that. They're just fun. I think a metaphor is a way that we meet other people with what is meaningful for them. Yeah.
Well, I find it compelling because our tendency is always to want to reach for our religious language, and to use metaphor sort of forces us outside of those convenient metaphors that we all act as though we know what they mean, when there isn't a real agreement if you talk to people about what they think they mean. And I'm curious, when you work with care providers, right, those nurse practitioners and physician assistants, is there any work you do to help them to cultivate and use metaphors in their work, or no?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I've explicitly asked that question or used that language. I am thinking about offering a creative writing workshop for integration as one of our what we call soul care space offerings that I can share more about. But I invited them to use metaphor or to rely. We talk a lot about their personal values and ask how their clinical work is an extension of their own personal values. And I think the idea of bringing metaphor into that explicitly would be really, really fascinating. I was interviewing one of our physicians recently and asked her, she's practicing Hindu, and I said, how is your clinical practice an extension of your own faith tradition? And she said, I'm a truth teller, and I believe in truth telling as part of my subscription to the idea of karma. And so I have dedicated myself to giving honest prognosis to my patients as often as I can, because I've already agreed within myself that I'm more devoted to truth telling and offering them the gift of my honesty than I care about them liking me in that moment, which I just love. So a lot of the work I do is trying to help people connect their own values, whether those are spiritual, cultural, whatever their values are, to the work that they do, and connecting to their own why and their own kind of through line.
I personally feel curious, like how, like the mechanics of your work, right? Helping care providers, like providing spiritual support to them. Do you do it via Zoom? And like what is it that you do?
Sorry, Jenna, my internet just went out just a little bit, but you said you're curious about how practically
Yeah,
I
like what
provide
does it
support.
look like? What do you do?
Yeah. So currently I'm in Phoenix, actually. About once a month I get to travel and meet with, usually it's our directors. So I work directly with a team of about 1,600 employees. About 30 of those are directors, about 100 of those are managers under them, and then under them are their field clinicians. I don't get to meet most of them in person, but I'm available to all of them. And there's a larger team of about 11,000 that I'm also responsive to, not responsible for, but responsive to. It's a treat to get to meet some of them in person, but the majority of my work it's virtual. We use Teams, Microsoft Teams, and it's video calls just like this. So it's one-to-one support, it's team support, and it's also those can look like all kinds of things, but part of what I've worked to develop is a rotation of what we call soul care spaces, which are I was sitting on a webinar from a hospital system that said, essentially, do you have any morally safe spaces in your organization? Places where staff can show up, process what they've been through, think through what it means, unpack in a way that's judgment free, and have a morally safe space to reconnect to themselves, one another. And I thought, not necessarily. We don't. We have those ad hoc here and there. So that's what we've created, and it's all virtual. This Friday, we have 3 on rotation. This one's called Stones to the River. Each of these have an element of ritual in them that's a little bit different. Stones to the River is a space to name your losses, whether that's I took care of, my favorite patient died this week, or I lost 10 patients this month, or personal. And people often bring their personal loss into it. And then I actually will drop a stone. That's why it's called Stones to the River. I have a jar of stones that I drop a stone. They're from our local river. And I drop a stone for every person or intention named. And then I actually take them and release them back at the local river. So it's Stones to the River. Is that one? We'll do a special one this Friday in honor of Mother's Day for everyone for whom that's complicated for whatever reason. And then next month will be a Circle of Care, and Circles of Care are a space to name and acknowledge and also take action behind the impact that world events have on us, acknowledging that we show up to work as whole humans, that things like school shootings impact us as human beings, and that of course we show up to the workplace with that. So it's a space for people to process what's happening in the world around them. We do those also on an emergency basis. So we had one in response to the Nashville shooting. We had one in response to Uvalde, the earthquake in Syria and Turkey. We do them responsibly, but we also hold them regularly. And that one, the ritual aspect of that is candle lighting. So as people name anyone that they want to honor in that space or any intention, I light a candle for them. So there's always a physical element to a ritual element. And the third one is a resiliency round. It's a space to name the impact that the work has on you, even on the best of days. So things like moral injury, trauma, moral distress,
Mm.
and then define coping strategies through that. So those are on rotation. We have those every month. We've also been doing blessing of hands events for things like Nurses Week is this week. Behavioral
Right.
Health Provider Day is on Friday. So we've been getting 200 to 300 showing up at each of those. And that's a space where we invite them to connect to their deepest sense of why they do the work. And we tell them it's not about us blessing them. It's actually them showing up to bless themselves and bless each other and send words of encouragement in that space.
You do
So
that virtually, Alex? Those,
virtually, all of
yeah.
them. Yeah.
Huh.
Sometimes we have another one for change management called Blessing the Change, helping people acknowledge the grief of any change and also begin to lean into the hope of what's the potential best case scenario. And that one I got to do in person with a team in Seattle that was splitting. So
Mm,
I did get to do that one in person.
mm. There's
Yeah.
a question that came in that when you're listening as a chaplain, how do you discern when you feel nudged to respond or to offer your own reflections?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. The question for me, I like to picture that container. Is what I'm about to offer, is it going to connect to them and point them back to their own story? Is it
Mm,
going to invite them to go deeper into their own story? Or am
mhm,
I somehow tipping that container back to me? Am I making it about myself? Is it about my
mm,
need to connect? So it's always kind of, am I holding the mirror up, or am I somehow relating more like I would a friendship, right? Is this a give and
right.
take? It really needs to be a give.
Mm,
Um, so it's kind of, it's trusting your gut in that moment, but the question is, will what I'm about to share connect them more deeply to themselves?
mm,
And sometimes that's sharing something vulnerable and personal, like, hey, when I have experienced that, I felt this way. Or as a new mom, I have experienced this. I'm curious if you have too. So it can be vulnerable and it can be very personal, but it's
mm,
about my curiosity about them.
mhm. This is a tactical question about how many chaplains are on staff
Yeah.
that help you with
Uh,
all this, right?
for the 11,000, I have a partner in crime now. There's two of us. For all of United Healthcare, which I don't even know how many people there are, um, there's four of us.
Right,
And two of them are primarily patient facing through calls, through all telephonic, which is a unicorn in itself that those exist.
right.
But
So
but
they're telephone chaplains, right? So two of
yeah,
them
essentially.
are, and they're outward facing. So the 11,000 people you care for, there's two of you.
Yeah, and that 11,000 is growing. Yeah. There's two of us. The hope is to greatly multiply our efforts. We've got more proof of concept now that we've been able to really get some of these programs off the ground. Um, yeah.
I'm going to come back to David's also got a question about how your work gets evaluated by in a corporate structure, which I think is a fascinating question. And I mean, maybe you can respond to it now because there's a few other questions coming in. So
Yeah.
like, who
The
evaluates you and how?
the real answer is anecdotally. I am currently a contracted worker, which means I've been able to exist a little outside the system, but I'm about to
Mm,
convert to a full-time employee, subjected to that yearly performance evaluation and all that. So to be determined, but we gather a lot of our kind of data and proof from the chat. Actually, we get a lot of comments from our events that say things like, this helped me feel valued by my company as more than just a number, or I didn't realize how much I needed to connect to my own sense of purpose. And we capture those and we send them wisely to the people that need to know. And the other thing is I mean, my support goes all the way up the line. So I actually the higher you go up the hierarchy, I probably spend more time with those people, even though at first my comfort level was the front line. That's what I knew. I spend
right.
more time with our regional vice presidents and our directors And so they get the support too. And they start to understand the value of it. And I've had them call me and say, hey, I don't want to talk about my team. I want to talk about me, which is a real honor to be trusted. So it's right now anecdotal. I'm hoping I got to present at the American Medical Directors Association this year on spiritual care, actually, in healthcare, which is great.
Yeah.
And my hope is to start finding a way to track things like retention, attrition. If you can just get a couple nurse practitioners to say that support from the chaplains helped me consider staying longer, I mean, that's worth the salary of a nurse practitioner plus the cost of hiring. So tracking things like that, but that's more of the survival mindset. What I really want to track is the effect our work can have on helping people just care for themselves better. Yeah.
So on that's a great segue, because Ruthie, I see your question about the pathway to certified chaplaincy, and I want to get to that. But one question that's come in is about self-care. You talk about poetry as a means of self-care and metaphor. I mean, I think you're naming metaphor as a way to sort of metabolize your work and to care for yourself. But do you have other practices you use as self-care?
Yeah. I just came up with what I'm calling Alex's hierarchy of needs. So think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's my hierarchy of emotional needs.
I don't know about anybody else listening, but I'm stealing that tonight.
And I'm going to patent it.
Like when I go talk to my family after this, 100%.
Yeah, so the foundation is self-care. There's a really great article called More Than Salt Baths and Chocolate Cake. Came out years ago, but I still refer to it. And the idea is that true self-care is not necessarily all the wellness things we're sold. It's this idea of building a life that you do not have to escape from. It's not the self-care as a form of escape. It's the life you do not have to escape from. It's the hard decisions of budget you'll stick to, an exercise routine that makes you feel good. It's the hard work of what she calls, Brianna Wiest is the author, the work of what she calls parenting yourself. Did you put yourself to bed on time? Did you drink water? Right? Like, so that to me, that frames up like self-care at its most foundational. Just basic physical care. I love that article. I highly recommend it. The next rung on that ladder is decompression and de-stressing. So the ways that we step away from the stressors. There's a great TED talk about stress, how it's not necessarily our enemy. Our stress response is actually part of our survival. Really, really great TED talk too, if you have time, really short. So I think about those decompressive practices as ways to just make sure that you're getting breaks through your day, decompressing at the end of a day, really stepping away from work, making sure you take that time off. And so those are ways to make sure that the tolls of the work don't accumulate over time, that stress doesn't build in the brain so you get like a different chemical baseline in your own brain. And then the third and last rung on that ladder are integrative practices that help you metabolize the work, especially when you have things like primary, secondary trauma, moral distress, heavy grief. That, for me, those tools are things like creative writing. It's whatever it is for you, but it's something that helps you integrate the work. For me, also painting. I've actually just started doing more acrylic painting. I just signed up for a class, Jana, to make sure. I was not giving myself permission to do it, but I had to pay someone to hold me accountable. But it's the space you take, the heaviness. Journaling is a really good one, but it's whatever it is for you, and it doesn't have to be verbal. For some people, it's I had a physician tell me at a conference lately that for him it's Tai Chi, right? It's whatever that space is where you take the heaviest things. So I like to separate those three out because I think we lump it all into self-care, and I think self-care is just the beginning. We really, providers of all sorts in healthcare, really need serious integration tools.
I think I'm going to ask this next question because like it's coming from me alone, but when you describe this idea of this hierarchy of needs, that's a highly regulated life, right? And it's a great, like, it's a great ideal, and it feels very aspirational. But my life experience is that I feel like I move in and out of regulation and dysregulation. Like coming out of the pandemic as a hospital chaplain, I was highly dysregulated, and
Yeah.
even to some extent still, like I feel like in myself there's like the reverberations are almost louder now because there's more space for them.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that's true for you, that you have seasons of being more regulated, putting yourself to bed on time.
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, not to name anything
Yeah.
specifically that has to do with my life, but is that true
Yeah,
for you?
totally. Absolutely. Yeah, and this is absolutely aspirational, and that's why I like to break it down because like this is all I get done most days. If it's a good day. If it's a
Right.
good day, I put myself to bed on time, right? Like
Mm.
it's I don't do all this all the time, but definitely not to just name a bunch of resources, but there was another great article by Adam Grant, the organizational psychologist, on called it languishing. This
Before
kind
you
of
wait, I'm going to
yeah.
pause you. We've linked the first article. Gabe has linked the first
Oh,
article
great.
that you referenced in the chat. So if you haven't seen that, then now name your second article that Gabe's going to go hunting for.
Thank you, Gabe. Languishing by Adam Grant. There's a partner to it called Flourishing.
Mm.
But he describes what I think of as kind of a collective adrenaline crash after the pandemic.
Oh,
Like, I think many of us were operating on all cylinders. We were rose to the occasion. We had a
yeah.
charge to meet. And I think as that need dropped, I experienced an adrenaline crash that lasted quite a long time and
Mhm.
resulted in what a lot of people have called, and Adam Grant specifically, have called languishing. And one of the symptoms is revenge bedtime procrastination. This idea,
Wait, say those words again. You said them fast.
revenge bedtime procrastination,
Oh, yeah.
where you stay up too late because you're trying to make up for whether it's you've got so much on your plate that you didn't get any personal time during the day.
Mm.
So at least I'm going to find that and I'll stay up till 2, and I'm going to watch Netflix till 3. And it's this way of getting for yourself what you weren't able to provide during the day, or for whatever reason that is. So I definitely have experienced some of that, just the kind of collective sense of meh, the kind of dulling. I would say my creative energies have ebbed and flowed a lot. I actually don't do a lot of poetry currently.
Mm.
I'm signed up for a children's book writing class because I'm thinking that is a way that I think I can probably channel some creativity a little more effectively for myself. It's also the world I'm immersed in. And I needed something nonverbal, so the painting was
Mm.
helping. So
Right.
absolutely seasons, and not it's I definitely don't want you to think I have this great disciplined life where I get all the sleep I need, I take all the breaks I need, and I paint every night.
Mm.
Like these are when I'm so desperate, I have to
Mm.
do something. This I do when I can.
Well, but I like the theme that you're working, which is this tension between the pragmatic demands of life. People have to earn a
Yeah.
living. We have to, we have children that go to college, but we also need to build a meaningful life. And I think this mandate of trying to build a life you don't want to escape, where we work the seam of pragmatics too heavily and meaning too little. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, another way I like to ask that question, and I ask this for my teammates too, is what if you had to live this day every day for the rest of your life? What
Mm.
would need to shift? Assuming you still had to work, right? And assuming that our work is meaningful. Um, but are you within every day or most days, are you safeguarding what's sacred and precious to you? And to me right now, what's precious and sacred is story time with my kid, it's bath
Mm.
time with my kid. It's moments with my husband. It's those little things. It's not the grandiose. It's just am I protecting the gold on my day to day?
How would you characterize the difference you experience as a chaplain between uh, providing spiritual support for care providers versus for patients?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to push your answer, but what I hear you speaking more to is the cultivation of wellness rather than the repair, like, of some catastrophic event or tending
Yeah.
to.
It is sometimes more proactive. Sometimes what I'm helping them unpack is a catastrophic event.
Mm,
So I had a clinician that had to administer CPR knowing it would be harmful to her patient
mm,
and knowing it went against everything in her ethical being, but the family wanted it, and helping her unpack that.
mm,
Sometimes it's sudden loss of a family member or a teammate. So sometimes
mm,
it's very much the same, but often it's also a step back from the crisis, and it's a broader sense of connecting them to their own inner strength and tools to show up to the work again tomorrow, um, or again next year. A lot of it's also more about organizational stress.
mm,
What happens when your team splits. So
right.
it's different work, but sometimes it's very much the same.
Mm. Ruthie, I want to get back to your question about sort of, it's a tactical question about the pathway to professional chaplaincy. Do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember everything that I did, but so I completed 4 units of clinical pastoral education and joined a local chapter that walked me through the process of completing my spiritual autobiography as well as, gosh, I don't even remember
Theory
all
of
the
practice.
papers.
Yeah, it's a,
Thank you. The theory of practice.
yeah.
And I also had to make an argument for equivalency. So talking about my experience and
Uh,
my degree in poetry and the ways that I use poetry and my master's degree, plus my experience, equivalent to having an MDiv in the ways that I
right,
that I apply it.
right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just so it's there. Typically, organizations ask for 4 units of CPE, which are each 400 hours
Hmm.
of certified units. And then you have to write some kind of theory paper and sit for board certification interviews. There is one organization called the Spiritual Care Association that only requires 2 units of CPE. But they also do some, you have to take some qualifying tests with them. So typically certification requires some kind of graduate level work, either an MDiv or an equivalent MA. So I hope that's enough of an answer. It's a lot of
Oh,
time. It's and
yeah,
money. It's an enormous amount of time and money
yeah.
for sure.
Endorsement through the Episcopal Church was also, as a lay minister, was part of that process too. So getting connected
Well,
with my local community and Mhm.
a question that came up for me early on, I don't know if you want to speak to this, but um, like your experience as a lay person who takes up professional ministry within your ecclesiastical body, like how is that for you when you show up to church and you're um a lay minister? Like,
Mhm.
is there friction? Do you feel, I mean, I don't want to load your question up with my bias, but do you experience any friction with the work you
I
take
don't
up?
really. No, I feel very honored by our priest who treats me as a peer, but
Mm,
also still acts as my priest.
mm,
And so there's a real mutual honoring that happens there. And I have been invited to help run various. So we just did a 6-part workshop on advanced care planning and death and dying, which
mm,
was a really great community offering. I think we should offer it every year.
mm,
And there's a lot of mutual respect. And she called on me a few times during the pandemic. I actually volunteered. There were people that needed a visit. And I'm like, I have the PPE, I have the training. I'm young, I'm healthy. Did not have kids at that point. Send me in. Um, but honestly, to me, I still get to show up at church as a parishioner,
mm.
and I can skip any day I want to. And
Right.
there's a real sense that I get to show up to receive, and that's actually been really really nice for me. People know what I do, but I
Mm,
don't feel too leaned on unless I'm helping with a particular offering. And the Episcopal Church for me, I know I shared some of in the intro video that my spiritual path kind of integrates a lot of different pieces. My
Mm,
mom was a lifelong Presbyterian who, towards the end of her life, started seeing a shaman. And after she
mm,
died, shamanic work and shamanic practice started emerging mysteriously as part of my path. Um,
mm,
and so I don't consider myself at all a shamanic practitioner, but I've studied with them. Those
mm,
inform some of my own spiritual practices, and the church is a place where I feel like I'm allowed to show up with all of those pieces, or I'm allowed to skip church and go to a drum circle or go on a hike.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
it's really nice to feel separate.
I think you are giving voice to the freedom that a lay minister has that an ordained person doesn't.
Yes,
I mean, I want to just give voice that your experience of feeling valued and as a colleague is not everyone's experience as a lay minister. I mean,
yeah,
at all.
yeah,
So I feel like
yeah.
you're lucky and you're a clergy person. And that's great. I'm happy about that. But I often say this, like the real beauty of being like a lay minister is just what you've described. Like you get to take any day off you want. You get to, I mean, it's really one of the benefits of being a chaplain, right?
Yes,
That
yes. I
that
love the context of chaplaincy and all of its settings that I've worked in. So, um, sober living community, behavioral health, the jails, the hospice, corporate, probably everything with the exception of corporate. All of those are places where you can meet anyone in any walk of life, and everyone ends
mm,
up in a hospital at some point. Everyone ends up at their deathbed at some point. Um, it's this really democratic context
mm,
that you don't necessarily, your patients don't choose into, but if they're there, I want to meet them there. Jail, you don't choose into jail, right? You don't choose into a recovery center for alcoholism. I mean, you do at some level, but you don't. So I love the context. I have thought about going the therapy private practice route, and I may at some point. I
mhm,
love psychology. It's probably what I read the most to inform my
mm,
work, but the the context of the place where chaplaincy happens is
mhm.
where I love to be.
Well, I like that you've described it as democratic, right? That you meet everybody everywhere, in places where not of their choosing. And there's something, they're thin spaces. They're vulnerable spaces where we meet people in chaplaincy. That's very different than church, and it's very different than spiritual direction, and it's very different than therapy. Because like whatever the problem is, it's unfolding. We're in the middle of the unfolding of it.
I like
Um,
to say therapy is downstream of a crisis. We're at the crossroads.
right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're getting close to our time limit. I don't know if there are any I don't know if there's any other questions. One came in about your work in hospice, like and your experience with end of life. The question is, is your experience that people in end of life is there a level of agitation or anger at God, or does it run the gamut?
Runs the gamut. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely runs the gamut. And I love all of it. It's
Mm,
honest and I love to be there. They're gonna feel that whether you're there or not. So to have
mm,
someone who's willing to hear it and willing to be in some ways, whatever your theology and your own practice are, you're a representative of the divine to them in that
mm,
space. Whatever
mm,
their practice is, whatever your practice is. And so being able to show up with love and grace in that moment, especially in the face of their anger, I think can be healing. Sometimes I saw more peace and gratitude than I saw anger, but I've seen guilt, I've seen anger, I've seen restlessness, I've seen it, sometimes it shows up as what we call terminal agitation, where someone is
mm,
truly, I think, probably working through some life trauma,
mm.
um, and all you can do is play soft music and hold their hand. But I would rather be there than have them be there alone.
There's an axiom in hospice that people die the way they live. Does that ring true
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think more or less it holds true. And I respect that. I also respect the people that tell me to get out of the room. It's like,
Right,
oh,
right.
you can't control much, but you can control that. And if that's
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
can give you, I will
yeah.
gladly, yeah, if I can offer that. Mhm.
Do you think there's some kind of chaplains and people who work in acute contexts, there's like adrenaline junkies? Like
Yeah.
we need, like
Yes.
we kind of thrive on problems.
Yes. And I think the hero language is problematic because I
Mm,
think it feeds um, that need to be needed in a crisis that sometimes drives some of our work. And
yeah.
so it also, not just chaplains, but all healthcare workers, I think, struggle to reach out for help, especially mental help when they need it. And so a lot of what I try to do is to help people not have to be heroes. I talk
Mm,
very openly about I see a spiritual director and a therapist both once a month.
mm,
Regular standard practice, basic maintenance. And I try to like when I take a mental health day, I try to put it in my OA message. I'm taking a mental health day because I want people to know it's not only okay, it's really important to do that.
mm,
So yes, I think adrenaline junkie. Um, I think it's important to find ways to, at least for myself, disconnect from crisis and grief
mm,
and sadness and reconnect to the other parts of life because I spend so much time there that I have had to find active ways to remind myself. I'll give you another great book. It's called Trauma Stewardship. And
mm.
it's about how our relationship to life can become warped if we're only connected to what's difficult and ways to reconnect ourselves to the other 99% of life, which is really beautiful a lot of the time.
Well, I was just going to comment on that. It feels like the work is sort of this ever narrowing circle because to be involved in people's catastrophes has a way of sort of, Sharon and I talk about this sometimes, it sort of ruins you for dinner conversation. Like
Yeah,
it's,
yeah, mhm,
not
yeah,
that dinner conversation is not real. I mean, it is real. It for sure has ruined me for church coffee hour. Like it's
yeah.
super hard for me. But that's the problem. It's this ever narrowing circle, and we can't just live inside of the catastrophe.
Right. The book, that trauma stewardship book, opens with a story of her standing on a beautiful cliff and overlooking it and thinking, gosh, I wonder how many people have jumped, and not realizing what a warped idea that is.
Right.
Right. So, dinner conversation, I mean, my sense of humor is totally morbid, and I have to check myself all the time because I think it's funny. But more deeply than that, what is my relationship to life
Mm.
like? And has it become a little off? And noticing those times in myself and taking steps back when I need to, and finding things like painting that help me connect to life and time with my son. Yeah.
David Kitch wants to know what your favorite poets are in our last 2 minutes together.
For this context,
No, 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 no. Don't
oh,
qualify it.
well, I love them. I love them. And I use them all the time. I have a book of John O'Donohue's right beside me because we did a blessing for new directors yesterday, which was really cool. But
Which
John
John
O'Donohue,
O'Donohue? Like, is there a
which John
particular
O'Donohue?
vol? Yeah.
He's a Celtic, which it's To Bless the Space Between Us is the book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Mary Oliver, of course. Gosh, it's whatever my most recent poet is that I've read. There's a book called Responsibility to Awe, and I'm blanking on her last name. I think it's Rebecca Elson, and she was a astrophysicist who died really young.
Mm.
But it says there's a beautiful spirituality throughout that book. Um, there's so many that I could name, but I love that question. Yeah, who else do I use? Oh, Jan
Well,
Richardson.
and
I
your
use. Mhm. Jen
no, go ahead.
Richardson's
Say the last
her
one.
books of Jen Richardson, The Cure for Sorrow, really great book of poems slash blessings that speak about grief in a way that's really real.
Well, I'm just going to plug Alex has a book called The Mother Stump. Isn't that the name of your?
So yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, your book of poetry too. All right,
Thank you.
we're at time. Alex, thank you so much. Just for me, it was so good to see you and to talk to
It's
you.
so
It's
good to
such a
see you. I
gift.
know.
It's such a
I know. We
gift.
should be doing this more.
I
Yeah.
know. And hey, thanks everyone for coming again this week. We'll send out the recording, right, Gabe?
Yes.
With
Yeah, I wanted to, yeah, sorry, I'm removing
No, it's
everything.
okay.
So yeah, I just want to remind, so yeah, I'm going to send out the recording. So I noticed that some people came in late. So I wanted to mention again that not to worry, I will send out the video recording of all this. And also I've put together all the links and all the book recommendations that we've talked about tonight. And so we'll also include that in the email as well. And I'll get some, I'll just verify those with Alex prior, but I'll have all those in there as well.
Thanks, Gabe. Hey, Alex, thanks for
Yeah.
spending your evening with us. I'm
My
grateful
pleasure.
for it. You're a
Wouldn't
gift.
miss it. Thank you. You
You're
too. Thank you all
welcome.
so much.